Welcome, everybody, to the first of hopefully many interview sessions with some of our past clients and fellow developers. Today, we have Quentin Burley here, who's the developer and director behind Pig and Chicken, which just released earlier this year. So, Quentin, uh, pleasure to have you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Pig and Chicken?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Um, my name's Quentin Burley, and Pig and Chicken was my MFA thesis project from University of Southern California. And it's a 3D platformer where the core movement abilities get weaker as the game progresses as a metaphor for aging and physical disability. So, in a world where pigs have wings and can fly, Pig, our main character, loses her wings in an accident. Her dear friend Chicken hops on her back and acts as her wings as they go on a journey to learn how to fly again. Um, and yeah, it's now available on Steam and the Epic Game Store.
So, I just wanted to start with kind of a more high-level questions. Um, how did you get the idea to do this game?
Yeah, yeah. So it actually is a personal inspiration point for me. Let's see, it's now almost 4 years ago. My dad suffered a severe spinal cord injury that left him quadriplegic. He was paralyzed from the neck down, and but he was partially paralyzed, not fully paralyzed. So he did go on a journey of rehabilitation, and well, that was the starting point. Kind of seeing my dad face this sudden life changing event of becoming paralyzed and then going on a journey of rehabilitation, and the people, in particular my mom, who was his primary caregiver through this whole journey, um, just seeing how their relationship and their strength of their marriage and their companionship and how that all unfolded. And unfortunately, yeah, he did his recovery didn't go very well. He never, the goal after a spinal cord injury is often learning how to walk again, and he never reached that goal. He didn't really regain a lot of function, and then he did pass away due to complications from his injury about a year ago. So Pig and Chicken was, Pig is very much inspired by my father, with this event of physical disability, and then going on a journey to learn how to fly again or learn how to walk again. And then Chicken is very much inspired by my mom, the aging caregiver who is, doing so much to support this person, but is also battling her own aging body. And it's caregiving is a very demanding task. And then all the other characters that Pig and Chicken meet along the way are inspired by my aunts and uncles, my family, my siblings, and how we all came together as a community to support my dad and my mom in that whole journey. So yeah, that's where it all stems from for me.
Yeah, and when I started asking that question, I like, even though I knew all this, I wasn't thinking about that. And then I got to the end of the question, I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna start with the heavy stuff. But you know what? That's what the game is about. And I
That's
think
what it's
I think
about.
that's
Yeah.
just, I think without it, it's not well, I don't know if it's not as powerful, but it certainly uh is an important part of the whole thing. Um, and that does kind of raise a question for me because you had um, obviously us and also an art team and design team and narrative team and programmers and all that stuff. And so, what was the experience like to be kind of sharing something so personal with maybe people that wouldn't immediately, wouldn't be like your five closest friends or your, I don't know, your wife or like, I guess, what was that like?
Yeah, yeah. I my background prior to becoming a game developer, I was a dancer and choreographer in the theater world, And in that space, vulnerability with your collaborators is kind of is a very celebrated thing. When you can come into a creative space and be vulnerable with one another, that's like a very it's a very juicy space to create something powerful that people connect with on a level that maybe they don't even realize in the moment. But because it, this openness about talking about these things in our design meetings, in our, in the art and in the music and audio, everything, uh, I don't know, it creates a space of trust because I'm giving to my team this really heavy, difficult thing. And them receiving that and then working with me on it, we get aligned creatively. So I think a lot of like good art comes from vulnerable spaces. So that was it was definitely a hurdle to like, like it's like wow, I'm telling I'm putting my soul out there, for everybody on this team to see. And that's hard to do, but I think it creates a safe space where we can really like talk about these deeper things and bring those to the forefront of the project.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree absolutely. And you're right. I hadn't quite taken a step back to look at it from that perspective, but um the creating a kind of circle of trust, it really did have that effect. And even if it was something highly technical, like when we were working on like Bat's echolocation puzzle with the sound and all that, I still I felt, I think, more compelled than usual to like really just every kind of idea that I had, or like, well, what does this say about the way Bat is, the way, like, we're thinking about, like, oh, maybe he's just really talkative because like he's give to chirping all the time, and then uh like kind of throwing those ideas back and forth, kind of, I think, was in part born of that environment you created by kind of offering yourself first. uh so I think that was really, yeah, really had a positive impact,
Yeah,
on the team in a way.
yeah, and I mean, you bring up Bat's level and that sort of echo location maze level. Like that was, and I know I shared this with you at some
Mhm.
point along the road, but my dad, when he, was in this state of paralysis, he became very fascinated with the sound of birds. Like, and this is a common thing when people, lose some ability, they rely greater on the abilities that they do have access to. So for him, his hearing got like way better,
Yeah,
weirdly, like, and he like just fell in love with music in a way he hadn't before, fell in love with the sounds of nature, and like that's where that whole level came from, and the design philosophy for that level came from this experience. So giving that to the team, it allows people to see what we're doing and why we're doing it on an artistic thematic level instead of
yeah,
just, oh yeah, it's a level.
yeah. And I that kind of raises the question for me, the because there's, like you said, this level, the dream level, the ocean side, I would say, to an extent, like the end of the game, um all of those are kind of like really directly inspired by maybe something your dad said. Like the dream was inspired by your dad's dream of like golfing, if I recall correctly. And um and so, question, what were some of the challenges behind kind of taking that, and then putting behind it, like, just kind of dry technical, like, this has to work at a, game loop level, and it has to work at a, and the, like, art has to look a certain way, and kind of bringing those two worlds together can sometimes be challenging for people, and so I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, like kind of the where this so personal thing, and then how do you like get into the brass tacks of making it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, I won't lie. Some really hard, I'm trying to deliver on this theme or this idea that's so personal, and then I'm banging my head against the computer because I have a bug that I can't figure out or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think it's if you care, like if obviously I care very deeply about Pig and Chicken and this whole story, so that kind of guides you through. And I want to care about the work I do, and I think as artists, we want to care. We want to have that driving force behind it to get through those nitty gritty things that are, difficult about the process of making games because they're just hard to do and they're messy. Um, but yeah, as long as you have, something driving your engine, you can get through it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, what were some of the maybe more challenging things? You said that this was one of the challenging things, but I'm curious, like what would you mark as your most challenging thing from this project, I guess?
What was the most challenging thing? Wow. I guess I want to say just like really getting it across the finish line. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you're in school, so this project was started as my MFA thesis project, but we did not finish the game, as you know, in that time frame. We continued working on it for another 9 months, almost 10 months after I had graduated. And then when you lack the structure of school telling you need to do this by this time, we as a team have to set our own deadlines. We have to make it. We're not getting, no one's getting graded or a scholarship or,
Hmm.
not like there's no incentive outside of us just wanting to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's hard. That's hard to do when, there's no outside force of structure. It's just us on the team. But we did it. And I'm so happy we did it. And, the game's out there and it's in the world. But yeah, just getting, you can get so lot like there's a million other levels that I've thought about creating, and all the things that get cut out to scope down to something that you can actually deliver on is the hardest thing in the world. Um, and we figured it out at some point. We did
Yeah.
figure it out and got the game published. So it's out there in the world, and that's the best thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what are some things that got cut that you kind of like wanted to have in there that you kind of wish, if you had more time or more resources or
Yeah, I guess. Well, now I'm like everything. Everything that went in was absolutely necessary, and it was perfect. And it was perfect scope from the beginning. No, it was not. But now I'm trying to. I think there was just so many. Pretty much every level in the game, in some way, is a metaphor for something around aging, physical disability, or caregiving, um, or community. There's something about that in every level. And it really, in Pig and Chicken as a whole, it really scrapes the surface of these themes. There's so many more things you can talk about in the nuances of, community building things and communities coming together to support members of that community, family dynamics. Like there's so many more things. But I think, the fact that Pig and Chicken is framed as like a fable and like a children's storybook kind of helped us cut things out because, well, this is maybe too nuanced, or honestly, there was a lot darker things that we could
yeah.
have gone towards, but we stayed away from those for the most part, to keep it in this tone of a fable.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and actually, I think the Fable uh, idea was really effective and kind of allowed us to scope down a lot because things could be, I guess you could say, simplistic, or they could be brief. They could be kind of like very much the high level stuff, and then kind of it just still encourages you to kind of interpret. Uh, and I remember when we added the storybooks, like the cutscenes, that was really I was really happy about that because I guess to describe for people who haven't played the game, the there's cutscenes in between certain levels, but it's not like an in-game cutscene. We go to like a 2D uh, drawing of like a storybook with the words and some voiceover, and then we kind of like flip pages, and there's these little like animated images. But it's kind of like someone's telling you like a bedtime story, and that was actually your sister, which was also I think a really uh, powerful choice, just because
Yeah,
of the significance of everything, obviously.
yeah. I mean, with my sister, she has two boys, my nephews, Jasper and Ronan, and they're 7 years old and 4 years old. And the way she reads to them when it's bedtime, and that sort of intergenerational experience of a piece of media that we have in children's books, because we're reading it to a child, and we have an understanding of what's going on that the child does not, right? And and like fables, we can come back to these stories, and based on our lived experiences and what we're bringing to that piece of media, it changes. The meaning changes. We learn different things about a fable, or a children's book. The first time you read it, it's like, it might have a very simple theme of be a good person, be generous, and then when you come back to it as an adult, it's actually about how hard it is to be a good person and bring that energy to
Yeah.
something, in the face of potentially really dark things that are going on. So I don't know. Yeah, that was why I wanted my sister to do that. And my brother was on the writing team. So it was really a family affair in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I would argue that one of the themes in Pig and Chicken is that I think for chicken, particularly that, uh, it being hard to do a good thing, because it's clearly, I think, to chicken the right thing to do to help pig out with finding her wings again. And chicken goes through a lot of the game kind of getting like tired and exasperated, and like really kind of goes through a lot of abuse before really uh getting to the point where she's like where sorry where chicken is like I like where they when they have their big fight. I guess I was
Mhm.
gonna say
Yeah.
where chicken, it says, you know what, I'm very tired, I'm gonna leave, but that's not it's not that peaceful of a but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also interesting that chicken doesn't really choose to leave. They're having the big fight, and they don't see that they're on the edge of a cliff, and then pig falls. Which I think was a nice way to write that too, you know?
Yeah, I think that, in the whole metaphor of this whole thing of caretaking, for somebody who's physically disabled, it wears on the caregiver a lot. And then some of the hurdles that the world throws at you, uh, are unexpected. Sometimes you think like, oh, it'll be okay, support systems in place, but then something as simple as the size of the door to get into this appointment for my dad, is it big enough for his wheelchair to go through? And these are the things you start thinking about. So that's kind of why they're having their argument. They're getting at each other's, they're on each other's nerves, but it's a lightning strike that separates them. And that's
Yeah.
the world coming in and making yet another hurdle, to get through. And hopefully you get through it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And they do come back together. Uh,
And they
for
do come
those
back
for
together.
those
Yeah.
for those listening and being very sad, they do come back together. And that whole scene was thinking about things that got changed due to scope and things like that. That whole scene was reworked. The finding each other was reworked uh, quite extensively. I remember we started with again spoilers. If I guess I should warn. The whole thing is going to be spoilers though.
Right.
So
Yeah.
just like blanket warning. But yes, I was saying, yeah, we started with a whole extra character of Butterfly, who was going to be like the kind of big wise or like wisdom giver at
Yeah.
the end of that
Yeah.
level. Um, and I kind of think that it worked. Honestly, in hindsight, it's kind of nice that they find that wisdom on their own.
No, yeah, yeah, it was definitely, Butterfly was cut from a scope perspective, like you say, but I think it made a lot more sense for Pig and Chicken to thematically and literally find each other on their own. And like, yes, there's still the Fireflies are helping out in this moment, but yeah, for them to reconcile on their own terms is the character growth. Because if somebody, hands Pig and Chicken, this is what you did wrong and this is how you will be better
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
future, they didn't grow. So Pig and Chicken had to find it on their own, separately, to then come back together. So yeah, it was one of those happy accidents that actually makes much more, better sense for the narrative and
yeah,
the whole
yeah.
project.
You also brought in a there was some USC connections. There was us through like Wild Thaw, which we had worked on before the previous project, and then you also brought on Jake, who is like a much older friend and longtime collaborator. Um, and well, you said you worked on many things before, but I'm sure this was particularly fulfilling, I guess, to have someone that's been such a close friend for such a long time kind of be on this, very personal project with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jake, you know, like I mentioned earlier, like I was a dancer and choreographer in theater. So I was collaborating with Jake through that whole period of my life in my 20s. And then growing up together, we're friends. We met in third grade. And in high school, we were in bands together, like we've been,
Yeah.
making music together, making art together for a very long time. And kind of going back to that vulnerability space of collaboration, when you develop that strong of a collaboration with somebody, it just gets to the point where, with Jake, I could just be like, it's like that scene in Final Fantasy 9, and it's the ice level, but like mix that in with a little bit of this thing from 2002, like you, and then he's like, oh, okay, here you go, this is it. I'm like, that's it, correct,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you just, so that we just work really well together, and yes, it's lovely to have a close friend be a close collaborator too.
hmm hmm Yeah, no, Jake was great, and I think he did a really good job with the soundtrack. I thought of him because I was thinking of the final scene, um, which was interesting to kind of work to kind of bring him into interactivity, uh, while still like I was put a lot of effort into making sure that you know that was more empowering than stymieing, as an experience, that wasn't like, oh, now I can't do all this cool stuff. It's like, oh, there's more cool stuff you can do. um and uh and that was a nice example of that, because I he really took well to like for that, I guess, for context for people who haven't played the game. There's Pig and Chicken end overlooking the ocean, and then they have a final conversation, and then you can click through that, right? So it's not exactly timed, like how long that's going to be. So there's kind of an initial loop for that section, and then we have a transitionary segment, and then we go into kind of the end, which is like a narration uh, from your sister, and then into the credits, right? And he really was able to kind of jump into making that musically work really well, uh, which can be hard for someone who's never done it to be like, oh, like all of these chords have to work with this transition because it could happen at any moment here.
Yeah, no, it really worked out. And, I'm really glad we ended up using Wise to give us the space for that type of stuff. Because that's where my brain is from a theater choreographer
Mhm.
lens. Like you have music cues and I can bring them in whenever I want. And that's what Wise allowed us to do. Um, so that was great. And yeah, Jake, he's also a gamer, so I think he knew the task
Mhm. Mhm.
beforehand, kind of like this is how video game music works, or has to work. So
Yeah,
yeah, he
yeah,
nailed it.
yeah. No,
Yeah, he nailed
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, I'm glad we used Wise too. That was a good call, I think, because I think way back at the beginning we did think of just doing Unity first, right? Um, and I think it had to do with uh, something with the source control, maybe size, something to do with size limits. I think might have been what it was. Um,
Yeah,
but I think it became clear that if we wanted to do all the cool things we wanted to do, Wise was just going to be a much more efficient way to get it done.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It was definitely one of the things that I think we integrated Wise in like January or something. It was about halfway through my last year in school.
yeah,
And
yeah.
all of my advisors and faculty were like, don't you
Oh
dare.
yes, that was also the case. Yeah.
They were telling me no, they were telling me we did it anyways. And I'm very happy we did it in the end because it really elevates the oral experience of the whole game.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, and I sort of understand why your professors would like advise against it because everybody that's doing that is students, and so um, not everybody has like the kind of necessary experience with Wise to not cause like a bunch of there's some maintenance you have to do and some like due process which like even when we were like doing our first collaborations at Berkeley with like Zach and Anna and I, we all ran into those issues too. So I as someone who's caused those problems, I can understand your professor's hesitation. But I'm kind of also glad that we ran into those problems back then, so that now we're capable of doing all those things. And yeah, I think it was the right call in the end.
Yeah, and through that whole wise journey, Zach Cabral joined the
Yes.
team,
Yeah.
and and he was great. It was excellent working with him. So we ended up having like a dedicated.
Oh, sorry. You cut out there for the dedicated thing. But actually, while I'm interrupting you, just so I only do it once, Zach Cabral is our audio implementer.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying it was great working with him, and yeah, we ended up with a dedicated audio engineer, just dealing with Wise, which was and the integration into Unity, and that was excellent. So yeah,
Yeah, we ended up with a pretty robust team with Jake taking the music, and then Zach doing the implementation, and Anna and Zach K uh, working on working on the sound design. That's a pretty solid team for the scope of the project.
yeah, the audio team was like really spot on the whole time.
Thank you. You
Yeah,
heard it here first,
thank you.
folks. Uh, yeah. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what it was like because you had kind of I think accepting probably the audio team and maybe production. Um, you had a lot of people kind of coming and going in some of the teams, because like people had to maybe they got a bigger course load after like you graduated and stuff. Just some of the people were still in school, and so they suddenly couldn't because they were working on their thesis, things like that. And so we kind of had like a couple different teams throughout the project, and I kind of
Yeah.
like, what was that experience like? And you know,
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, part of that's just the nature of it being a student project. First and foremost is, like you said, like some people, they had the space this semester, but they couldn't, continue on to the next semester. People joined the team later, halfway through the school year. Um, and, I think that, from a production perspective, that's definitely a challenge when you're dealing with um, a rotating cast, I guess, of, people in the room. But it also kind of informed me on like how do I lead this space, and it has to be okay, it has to be okay when a student says, hey, I don't have the time to do this because my course load's higher, or I had to pick up a shift at my job, because I'm not paying anybody. This was a student project turned indie, thing. So that has to, those things have to be accepted as this is what we're doing. And when somebody comes in and says, hey, I didn't quite get to what you wanted me to do this week, it's okay. No worries. Thank you for being here. Thank
mhm,
you for doing what you are doing. Because again, like I said, like it sets the tone on how we move forward. And I was really pleased with a lot of people on my team who later said to me, oh, Quentin, it was so nice working on your team. I never felt, people didn't feel like they were messing up something because
mhm,
they didn't have time. It's like, it's okay. We
yeah,
will, we are owning this and we will figure it out. And that's how you have to do it.
yeah,
Comes with its
yeah,
challenges, but it creates a space where like we're communally owning this project, and it's just us, it's just you and me, and that's good. There's no publisher, who's holding something over our head or something. It's like we can do it on our time as long as we all have the patience and you know
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was is I know I like we had to kind of develop a very modular kind of priority system for our tasks, because like the there was always the chance that like you said, like maybe someone just didn't get to it that week, because we're working with lots of students, and that's okay, right? And so yeah, I'm glad that we had the sort of administrative team that we did, where I feel like we were all fairly like good at like working with that, and kind of like you said, like being understanding, and being not being like, whoa, you you didn't do the thing that I
Yeah, yeah.
and but still keeping keeping the momentum going, and be like, okay, yeah, sure, can you do it this week? Or why don't we move this around, and let's actually get to this other task that's maybe more important to get done first. Or similarly, I like we had a lot of I think because I think our the audio team was like unusually fast in that framework. We I think did a good job of kind of staying busy in a way that wasn't useless. That we were just like doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. And getting kind of those extra, just taking the time to like do some extra polish, do some extra stuff that we
Hmm.
haven't had time for. And I think the soundtrack is really well mixed as a result. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
we got to record live instruments, just do some cool stuff with all that, and so yeah, no, I'm really happy that kind of the team was the way it was to help really allow for that.
Yeah, yeah. I really like the way you put the sort of, we had to be very agile and move around based on like, okay, well, we don't have, the person who's going to implement this whatever asset is too busy right now. So we got to shift gears and like focus on the things we can do and what we
Mm,
can get done right now. And,
yeah.
so it created a very, we were a little all over the map, but like you said, we stayed busy and we were always improving the project, which is, it's easy to just be like, well, we can't, let's everybody take the week,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we never really
Yeah.
did that,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
kept moving, which was good. And the project
Yeah.
definitely benefited from us being able to, just dive in and do different things when we needed to. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, similarly, I guess from the other end, like at least on our team, the way like we brought Zach on, Zach Cabral, because when we moved from Perforce to Git, because of like having graduated and stuff, we couldn't use the Perforce anymore. So moving to Git, uh, kind of just like it took a little while, and that was around the same time as we had decided we're going to switch to Wise. So like until that got sorted, we couldn't like start implementing them. We were also going to just basically implement from scratch. So all of a sudden we were like super behind. And so, similarly being able to, you know, kind of be modular in the other way and be able to like bring someone else on to kind of do the catch up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna ask you this at the beginning of the um, interview, but then we kind of went off in a different direction. Uh, so it's kind of like a really low ball beginning question, but what's your favorite part of the game? Would you say you have
um,
a favorite?
yeah, yeah, and I think it's the ending. And you were discussing it earlier. I think it's rare when the vision in your head is delivered so clearly on. And really, that last scene is exactly what we talked about making,
Yeah,
from the audio perspective, the visual perspective, the writing, what we came up with, we made. And that's rare. That's a rare thing. And I really love the ending. It's soft. It's not too, it's not harsh or anything. It's a very nice moment, and a lot of the whole game just really comes together in the ending. And there's a phrase from my time in dance and theater where we would say, endings are hard, and we would
mm,
say this phrase, "Find an ending." And this is perhaps the first time in my creative career that I'm like, we found an ending, and it's really solid. So yeah, definitely the ending is my favorite part of the game.
nice.
What's your
Yeah.
favorite part?
I would also say the ending. Honestly, for the same reasons. Like I remember those early conversations. And actually going back to the creating the space of trust, because I remember suggesting it be in front of the ocean or something, some element of that, which normally sometimes I might hold my tongue about that because it's kind of out of my jurisdiction. Like you're here to talk about audio, right? So depending on the team, that might not necessarily that it's like, oh, how dare you like say something, but it might just kind of like confuse things more if everybody's piling in to every conversation, right? But yeah, the fact that it was nice to be able to contribute that, and and yeah, I mean, like you said, everything we sort of wanted out of that scene came out of that scene. And really
Yeah.
wonderfully. And the your sister's monologue. Well, yeah, no, it's a monologue, right? At the end,
Yeah.
narration is always a monologue. So it was like, uh, you're, uh, but uh, no, it's just it really it really feels a special way. Um, I would maybe throw in, I guess, as a second to not say the same thing. I would say the the dream was nice. The dream, I think,
Yeah.
because of the significance, what you were saying to me, that when we first started that scene, because the dream is Pig, like, basically dreams that she can fly again, and it's at first you're like, whoa, what's going on, and then you realize, oh, it's this is not real, and then big floating chickens start coming around, and then it starts to get a little bittersweet, uh when you realize, like, you know she doesn't have her wings back. But also I think that one was um kind of felt the best to work on, just because of the um conversation we had about your dad, and how he said that he would dream of golfing, and just using his legs again, and how I really had that image in my head the whole time through that process, and so it was kind of, I guess, particularly, I guess, for some of the levels, there's some times where I had to kind of set aside the emotions for a second so that I could, like, work out a bug, like you said, or um, decide kind of what, like, I don't know, um, what the attenuation settings for this sound need to be, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but the dream sequence was one where I really felt like those were in concert, uh, because the image was so strong for me. So that was a particularly nice one to work on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. The dream came, the dream was really, it came together similarly to the ending. It came together in a really good, strong way that was really what we set out to make.
Mhm.
And I'm sure I said this to you at some point, but I think it's interesting to bring up here that the dream. I mean, like you said, it was inspired by my dad. I had asked him basically if he, in his dreams, was he able-bodied or not,
Mhm.
or I asked him, "Do you dream of walking again?"
Yeah.
And he said, "No, but I dream of golfing." In his dreams, he was able-bodied, and I always wondered, did that ever change for him? Did he, in his dreams, was he paralyzed at a certain point? But from a game design perspective, the dream also served this really interesting role for the player, as we called them, like, respite levels. And that was a metaphor for respite care, where in this scene, Chicken's not carrying Pig. And it's, respite care refers to, actually, it's more about the caregiver. So it's Chicken gets a break from his caregiving role in this instance to take space away, while the person who is being cared for has some other caregiver stepping in for a moment. And for the player, it was this moment of, oh, you get to fly again. You get to have the abilities you had at the beginning, and there's no constraints. There's no aging, stamina bar uh, pulling you down. It's just freedom of motion again. And that was this moment of, we called them respite levels. And the dream does that, and then the penguin ice slide uh, level is the respite moment in the game.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't know about that. That's
oh,
that's
did I? Yeah,
really, yeah, I don't know that we ever had that conversations. That's cool to, yeah, no,
yeah,
it really makes sense. And that makes the rocks kind of crumbling on you at the end of the dream sequence, like the kind of rude awakening, like that much more unpleasant, I
yeah,
guess, that much, or that much more kind of, the, like, it, like, that feeling of, like, we never really get to put this down, like, you know it's just,
yeah.
constantly kind of hammering at you,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that juxtaposition of, like, this freedom of motion, and then when Pig wakes up, Pig and Chicken are in the bat level where it's dark. Chicken cannot lift Pig up. The stamina bar is at its weakest point in the game, pretty
Hmm.
much. So yeah, it's that big juxtaposition of the platforming,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and that it like maintains interest for the player. If it just was, oh, you start flying and then you can't fly, and then you can't, and like now you can only jump a little bit, and it would just be boring. So we had to, you know, give the player a little, variation on what they could do, while narratively the whole thing is still diminishing on that, downward slope.
Yeah, I remember people, well, your advisors were a little hesitant when you pitched the idea that you would lose abilities over the course of the game instead of gain them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, it was like, what if we made a badly designed game?
yeah.
There's a reason, platformers progress upwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was one of the ways we handled it from the design perspective, was with these respite levels, and just kind of changing the overall gameplay as the whole thing unfolds.
Did you have a particular, this is kind of going off a little bit. I thought of I thought back to when you said, that the people that they made, or the birds that they made along the way are um are representative of the community, right? Um and they definitely have very big kind of like different personalities. And I guess what would you say that like each of them kind of represents to you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So Heron is the first character that Pig and Chicken meet. And Chicken is just convinced, let's go see Heron. Heron will know what to do. Heron's the wise bird of the forest. Um, and that kind of was inspired by doctors,
Mhm.
essentially. When my dad had his accident, obviously we were meeting with doctors all the time. And there's an interest, and my dad was a doctor. He was a cardiologist,
Oh,
and there's, we sort of, in my family we call it doctor speak, where the doctor maybe knows more than what the patient or the family of the patient is willing to accept at the time. And that's kind of what Heron says to Pig and Chicken. Pig
yeah.
says, Heron, how do I get my wings back? What do I do? This type of thing. And Heron says, I'm not really sure, but what I think you should do is you should go see Penguin. And he basically sets them on the journey, but it's almost a little. I mean, it's a short scene, because the game's pretty small. But I
Yeah.
sort of, it's he's saying you got to keep moving forward.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's really what Heron's saying, and that's what the doctors told us. Some doctors, in retrospect, I bet most doctors who saw my dad after his accident knew he was never going to walk again. I
Hmm.
think they knew that. They knew the severity of it, but we were not ready to hear that at the time.
Yeah.
So that's what Heron is. Heron's the doctor pushing them off on the journey that they're about to go on. Um, then they meet Penguin, and Penguin is kind of inspired a little in his character, inspired by my brother, but more broadly, about people who came in to provide that respite. My brother, so like you mentioned, my dad is a golfer.
Hmm.
Um, and my dad, my brother, and I always did this, basically it was a golf tournament that in my dad's hometown that we always went to for multiple years when we could. We would always go with my dad to this event. Um, and obviously we did not do that when he no longer could play golf and participate in that way. But one year when my dad was paralyzed, my brother took him to that event. And it was a really interesting thing. And they called me. My brother calls me, and I'm on speakerphone with my dad, and he's with a bunch of old friends of his, and his voice sounded so different. It was his old voice before he had his accident, because he was just having such a great time. And that was the respite moment for my dad. where he's gone on this little journey off, 2 hour drive away, to go do this event. And for a brief moment, he forgot, that he was paralyzed. I mean, that's a little
Yeah.
flowery to put it so simply that way, but there was just this moment of release. And we're just having fun right now,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is what Penguin provides Pig and Chicken. They meet Penguin, and he's also a little bit of a metaphor around. Pig says, "Well, how do you fly? Like, how do you fly?" And Pig's like, or sorry, Penguin is like, "I don't fly. I have wings, but I don't fly. I fly through the ocean. I fly on, sliding on ice." And then he shows them, and this becomes this fun little mini game moment, essentially, of sliding down a frozen river on Penguin's back. And that, like, to me, that's my brother taking my dad on a little trip where we could just forget about the woes of what's going on right now, and we're just here to have fun for a little bit. So that's Penguin. And then Bat was a little more interesting. Bat kind of wasn't necessarily inspired by someone in particular, but he just kind of he creates that space where, um, like I mentioned earlier, my dad became very, reliant on his ears in a way that he had not been before. His hearing literally got better, and he started to identify the sounds of different kinds of birds in the backyard, and he got like more into music than he had ever been before. And I think so. Bat became sort of a metaphor because Bat flies, or by listening to where he's going. Um, and that's kind of what he says to Pig and Chicken. So it's simultaneously a character that just provides that opportunity for the player to start listening and keying in on that to sort of simulate that experience. But then also, um, Bat is like Penguin, not disabled, but differently abled. Maybe is the way I should say
Right.
it. Um, he flies, and he uses echolocation, and his body is different, and he, navigates the world in a different way. So that bringing those ideas into it, that people are differently able, bodies are different, and people navigate the world in different ways, but like literally navigate the world in different ways. So that's kind of where he came in. And then the last character is the Fireflies, which throughout the whole game, Fireflies are a collectible that are really, really functioning as collectibles, in the
Yeah.
level design sense of they're leading the player through the world. But then at the end, they reveal themselves as a talking character and then literally lead Pig and Chicken around to re-find each other. And they're the people that have been there the whole time. The physical therapist that my dad had, my aunts and uncles, his friends, my friends, his friends, all the people that are there the whole time helping out, maybe not in an obvious way, but we're there, and we're there to support. And so Fireflies became that community, of people instead of a singular person.
Yeah. Yeah. I knew the kind of significance of Penguin, but I don't think you had ever told me that story. That's a really nice story. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. And then, I think that was a really fulfilling thing about working on this project, is like there was a lot of moments like that when working. I feel like the way that I just felt about hearing you talk about your brother taking your dad to the golf game is similar to how I felt when we were talking about the dream, and having those conversations, or when we're talking about Oceanside or things like that. To me, working on a project like this, which is I think, you know pretty much like like true good, you know, for starters. Like you can't argue that it's like got some like weird like bad like sub themes or something like that, or like oh it's like promoting violence or something like that. It's just like really like just a nice story to tell, and also so kind of personal and real, you know. um was like such a dream come true for me. um and so I guess thank you for that, thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think somebody once said it wasn't actually to me, but it was to a collaborator I had in the dance world, and she said, "Your work is good, but it's not great because you're not centering your lived experience at the forefront of your work."
Mm,
And even though it wasn't directed at me necessarily, I really took that to heart, and I think that Pig and Chicken centers my lived experience at the forefront of the artistic work. And I think that, I guess, circling back to where we began this whole conversation, that vulnerability, like I love hearing that you had this experience working on this, because that's the kind of artwork we want to be making. We want to make
absolutely.
stuff that is personal and has a message that we can all relate to in some way. So thank you for being a part of it, because I'm
Yeah,
very
of
happy
course.
with how it all unfolded. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Quentin, for coming on and you know, talking uh about the project, and you know, um thank you for getting so personal about it. I you know, continuing to be glad for your, you know, just generosity in your vulnerability, I guess. And so thank you. And yeah, uh,
Yeah.
welcome back anytime. Make another
Yeah.
game.
I mean,
We'll bring you back with me.
yeah, yeah. There's going to be more. We'll be working
Mhm, mhm.
together soon.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Thank you, Tomas, because it's been, we released the game in March. It's been a few months now, away from thinking about it all the time,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
this has been a very nice conversation to kind of, look at it and with some, retrospect. This has been great. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
been lovely.
it has been really nice to look back. I feel like when you release the game, all you're thinking about is like there's that bug I didn't like we didn't fix, and I hope
Yeah.
nobody notices that I, you know, that like there's this issue. And now it's nice to kind of look back and like celebrate the things we did well. You know.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening. Think this was Quentin Burley, director of Pig and Chicken. And yeah, bye bye.
Cool.
I'll figure out a better sign
Bye.
off.
Thank
We'll
you.
figure out a better sign off as I do this more.